Who said cats and dogs can't be best friends? This loving cat was seen hugging a stray dog all through the rough winter. At first, it was sweet to watch, but people in the neighbourhood noticed how the fluffy cat would never leave his side, almost like a guardian angel of some kind. And when they found out the real reason behind their unusual friendship, it was enough to break all of their hearts. People first saw the cat hugging and comforting the little dog by the entrance of their apartment complex. The residents soon noticed that the cat followed the dog around everywhere, like a second tail. Their favourite spot seemed to be a rug in front of the complex. When people walked by, the scaredy cat would politely move out of the way, but not the determined puppy. He was totally focused on staying put and made sure he looked up to see the faces of every person who passed by. Who was he looking for? Did his owners live in the building? And if they did, who'd leave such a precious pooch out in the cold? Weeks later, people got used to greeting this dynamic duo as they walked by each day. No matter what happened, they never moved from this place. And if it got too cold, they just snuggled even closer. But 6 months passed by, and now the winter got harsher. It was finally time to get these two off the streets and somewhere warm. A kind woman took pity on the freezing couple and built them a mini shelter out of cardboard. She even gave them food and labelled the box a temporary house for a stray dog shivering with cold. Now they had a house and some warm food to avoid freezing. But strangely enough, they'd still camp out in front of the building. The dog continued looking at every passerby, and the cat stayed loyal by his side. The good thing was that the people in the neighbourhood were invested in the well-being of this unusual duo. They gave the furry friends food to help them survive the bone-chilling cold. Now, the weather was getting too cold for the two buddies to live outside like that. Even the warmth of cuddling up every night wasn't enough. Finally, one day, the apartment manager told everyone why the dog never moved. It turns out this adorable little guy was abandoned right here by his owners, who used to live in this very complex. His elderly owners had to relocate to a nursing home, and sadly, the nursing home didn't allow any animals. Still, this poor pup didn't lose hope at their return, even after 6 months when the weather started to get so cold. His health was at risk. The cat had come to him 2 months later and might have saved his life. So, when residents saw that leaving food for them outside or trying to get them in makeshift houses wasn't enough to help them survive the harsh winter, they decided it was time to get authorities involved. The plan was to get them both safely into a rescue shelter and wait for them to get adopted by loving families. But things don't always go as planned. The rescue workers showed up and set a trap. They were supposed to lure both the cat and the dog into the trap by using their favourite treats. But when the time came, only one of the inseparable buddies fell for it. The dog saw the green net and sensed that something was up. He refused to take the treats and come near it. His cuddle buddy, on the other hand, couldn't resist the treats. And there, in a split second, he was trapped in the net. Scared and confused, he tried to break free, but it was too late. The dog watched all of this. Terrified out of his wits, he decided to run away, and so the two best friends were separated, one trapped in a net and the other out in the streets at the risk of getting lost. The people waited for the dog to return, but there was no sign of him. It seemed like he'd finally given up on his 6-month-long wait for his old owners, now that his buddy wasn't with him anymore. But then, the next night, he came back, probably in search of his very little friend. This was the perfect opportunity to catch him, and the people on the rescue mission weren't going to miss it, so this time they set a different trap. The dog's feline friend was a part of it. When he saw his old buddy, the little guy got comfortable and decided it'd be okay for him to go near their usual spot in front of the building's entrance. What he didn't know was that he was surrounded by people holding a large net, waiting to catch him and send him somewhere safe. As the people started closing in on him, the poor dog was terrified. He was shrieking and trying to find a way out, but this time, thankfully, he couldn't get away. The little dog was put in a cage and taken to the rescue shelter along with his feline bestie. The good thing was that even the rescue shelter knew the rules. You don't separate these two from each other. They were kept there together, and even the people from the neighbourhood came to see them. Now it was time to take them to a vet for medical checkups. Fortunately, both of them were A-OK, and it looks like the residents took amazing care of them. The next story is of a puppy with such a tragic past that she'd never wagged her tail in her whole life, until she found a new home that changed her entire life. Meet Blossom. This lovely girl only knew one emotion: fear. When she was brought to the rescue shelter, she couldn't fit in. She was afraid of humans and used to hide away from everyone and everything. But then, a kind foster dad, Rocky, took her home. Rocky is an experienced dog rescuer, and he thought Blossom would just be another one of his cases. He was wrong. When he brought her home, she only got more scared and started shaking from fear. Instead of getting comfortable in her new home, she found a corner under a table and hid there. For days she stayed there, and her fear didn't go away. Hiding in a corner, she kept shaking from fear, expecting the worst to happen. Turns out, she was a victim of an extreme hoarding case. Rocky seems to have underestimated the abuse Blossom had gone through. She was even scared of the sun and grass because she wasn't used to being outside. And why wouldn't she be scared? This poor girl had never been given a treat in her life. She was so neglected she didn't even know how to drink water from a bowl. But Rocky didn't lose patience. He thought of a new strategy. Instead of forcing Blossom out of that corner, he moved the table and built a cozy little home for her right there. And that's when things started taking a turn for the better. The dog, who was once paralyzed from fear, finally started accepting treats out of Mike's hand. But in order to feed the dehydrated pup, he had to cook them and make them moist first. After spending the first 6 weeks watching thirsty pups lap up their drinking bowls, she started doing the same, and that's when things started getting easier for Mike. Finally, she let him pet her as she jumped on the couch to sit next to him. Not only that, but she even started playing with the dogs. This was a huge win. Soon, her fearful trembling turned into happiness as she started wagging her tail. Yep, for the first time in 3 long years, Blossom was finally a happy, carefree dog. Soon, she started accepting treats, enjoying her walks, and most importantly, trusting people. And thanks to Rocky's efforts, Blossom was adopted by a loving mum only a few months later. While the first 2 stories were about abandonment and hoarding, this poor dog had to survive 10 whole years of being chained up. It doesn't end there. Judith's owners starved her, urinated on her, and left her out in the cold while it snowed. They didn't even clean her feces, and she spent those 10 years sitting in her own excrement. When the neighbours complained to the officials, they were only willing to euthanize her. But thankfully, an animal rescue reached the scene 2 days before she was supposed to be officially euthanized. The poor dog was cleaned up for the first time in 10 years. Her fur was so heavy because of the dried mud and excrement that she couldn't even wag her tail. The rescue team shaved it off, and the first thing this brave girl did was wag her tail. The shelter provided her with a warm bed, and for the first time in a decade, she slept in peace. But it wasn't enough. Because of all those years of limited mobility, her hips were too weak and she was so thin that you could see her skeleton. She needed proper love and care. And thankfully, she ended up in the right place. She was adopted by a loving family who took her out on walks and picnics. Sadly, soon her hips gave out. But this time, she had a family. Judith used a cart to go around, and her spirits were as high as ever. She had a lot of love to give, even after going through hell. Judith died after 18 months of being rescued, but those 18 months were filled with the joy and love she deserved.